been hearing me talk a lot about Rob Arsenault and Weather My Trains. How about I tell you about my experience? I can sum it up with one word: easy. My first weathering job was a locomotive, and Rob made it simple. He sent me easy to follow shipping instructions, and in just a few minutes at the local post office, it was off. And the results? Absolutely amazing. As promised, Rob notched up the realism with an amazing weathering job, and it wasn't too long after that, my rolling stock was heading his way. And now you can make it even easier by ordering your next Bowser, Intermountain, Rapido, or Scale Trains locomotive from Weather My Trains. For more info, visit their website at weathermytrains.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me back on Around the Layout, Lance Mindheim. Lance, welcome back.
It's always a pleasure, Ray. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you back here on the show, and always look forward to our chats here on the podcast. We always learn quite a bit when we have a conversation with you, and I think you've been busy here because I see a new book sitting on my desk here.
Yep, I've got another one coming out in 2 weeks too. But yep, I have been busy. I mean, it's custom layout building. You have, it's feast or famine. It's either slow or you're going crazy. So when things are a little bit slower, then I do the books, and then I need to take a pause when the layout building side picks up.
Is there a season to layout building, or does it seem to be just up, down, and doesn't matter what time?
It is totally random. It drives me crazy, but it's unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, we were debating this last podcast I had with Tony Cook about if there is a model railroading season. He says there is not. I think when the lawnmower comes out, it kind of interrupts the model railroad season a little bit of distraction and whatnot, but I think maybe it is 12 months a year. It just depends. And maybe it, just kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year.
I would say that the thing I have noticed is during the winter, I get a lot more inquiries, but I would say they're more from the beginners, the less serious. And then it's odd, in the summer, the inquiries drop, but they're much more serious in nature. I mean, the people that are serious about buying, I seem to get more of them in the summer. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see how everybody's model railroading flow goes. And yeah, it's I don't know. I think the other concept we came up with is maybe there's just a few intermissions, like a hockey game. First intermission in the spring, second intermission in the fall, and somewhere in between. When it gets too hot, go down and work on the layout. When it gets too cold, go work on the layout. But nonetheless, we have Lance Mindheim here. Really thrilled to talk about what you've got going on here. And again, this book that you've done called Shortlines You Can Model Volume 1, Miami Swamp Rat, and you've put Volume 1 on there. So that kind of indicates that you've committed yourself to maybe a Volume 2 and then on here, Lance. So I think you may have stepped in it a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, all kidding aside, when I was typing that, my hand wavered a little bit on the keyboard before I wrote that Volume 1, because I knew that it would be that I would be committed, but I decided to go for it. So we will see.
Oh, that's great. Well, you certainly have a lot to say and a lot of information to share. But to start with, tell us a little bit about this concept of short lines you can model and kind of your why into why you wrote this book and created this pending series.
It's kind of an experiment, and it's too early to tell, Ray, whether it's going to work. But the situation I find myself in is I really enjoy writing the books, and they've been very well received. I mean, it's exceeded all of my expectations. So it's something that I want to keep doing. And particularly, in 4 or 5 years, I'm going to be winding down to custom building and retire, but I would like to write until they plant me under. But here's the problem. At this point, I've really hit all of the major subject areas, whether it's design, operations, art. I've got a book on structures coming out in 2 weeks from Kalmbach. So I'm in a situation where I'm kind of a victim of the success that I've had so far, and I've run out of topics. And the one thing that I am adamant that I do not want to do is spend an enormous amount of time and energy on these micro niche topics. I don't want to do something, I mean, to take it to absurd, I don't want to do track mobiles from the 1980s or something like that. They'll have 3 people read it and they may be enthusiastic, but once you've hit the broad topics, you have a problem. And I'm really looking for the next way forward. And it's going to be a challenge because when you look at how-to books are a little bit different than a novel. So not that I'm Michael Connelly, but you take a guy like Michael Connelly or a novelist, if the book's promoted, you get a huge spike, and then it fades into oblivion for the most part. With model railroad books, it's almost good in a way, but you get a little bit of a spike, but they tend to have a lot of longevity, which surprised me. So the books I wrote 10 or 15 years ago, the sales are very, very steady. The problem that you run into with this format is, how are people going to find it? How to track plan books, how to design. People can find it if they're looking for something. And this is a little bit different. So, I've got my loyal base, which I appreciate very much. And a book like this, your loyal base will always buy it, if you put the effort in. The problem is then the trailing sales over 5 or 10 years. And that's the thing I need to think through, whether that's going to work. Once your loyal base has their book and they're happy, the general public 5 or 10 years from now, how are they going to find this? And I'm not totally sure it's going to work. The advantage is that if it did work, then I've solved the problem of what to write about, because, there's no limit to the subjects you could cover. So I'm kind of in an experiment, trial and error phase, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I think there's something to get out of this book that you've written. I had an opportunity to read through most of the book and get the concept of your book. And I think there's modelers I know like me who have like an idea of what we want to do, but we don't have an application for the ideas. And I think this book really does help. And I think as more of them come along, where it hits some of the ideas that other model railroaders have, that they may not have a prototype for it. Like they know what kind of switching they want to do, or they know what kind of operating in general they want to do, but they can't figure out, okay, where do I apply this to, or how do I develop a story if I'm going to go the freelance route? And I think that a lot of that is right here in this book.
Yeah. And that's really the challenge in writing a book like this. And it ties into what you were saying, is it's really a case, right, of threading the needle. Because I was trying to serve 2 masters. I wanted it to be entertaining, something that a person could read the first half, when they're on a plane or at the beach, and just enjoy it for entertainment. But then the second half would go into how to apply it to a model railroad. And the challenge was, on one end of the spectrum, it could be pretty darn boring. I mean, if you make it up and it's just like, okay, this railroad got a charter in 1955 and then they were acquired and it's just a data dump, that's a real snoozer. On the other end, if you get too slick and it gets really trite or corny, it's just stupid. And it's the kind of thing you'd be embarrassed to have written, just something that's that corny. So the challenge was to come up with something in the middle. And what I tried to do, and it was cheating a little bit, was to go to actual newspaper articles and rewrite them a little bit. The first one, right from the Drug Enforcement Agency, that's a government agency, I could just dump that right in. But I was sitting there pondering, I was just reading an article on WTOP, which is a local DC news channel, about this ding-dong crook and all of his scams. And I'm like, I can use that. All I have to do is change his name and change the nature of the scam, and it's going to be totally plausible because it actually happened.
Right.
So that was kind of the strategy to make it more believable.
Yeah, it's great that you tied in an entertainment aspect to it, and the stories that you've shared in here are pretty wild. But based on reality, and I know you've made like you talk about in the book, several trips down to Miami, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit. But tell us again a little bit about your experience with the real Miami and your observations there in general.
In the book I just did, or the article I just read did for article or for Auto, there was a lead in one of the train forums, and that it is just like no other place in the country. And if you think about it, I grew up in southern Indiana, and I drove to Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm like, gee whiz, this is not that different from where I grew up. And then you go to Pennsylvania, it's the same thing. You can go up to Maine or down to North Carolina, and geographically, these places, huge sections of the United States look pretty much the same. And despite what you'd think on the news, culturally, they're not that different, really. I mean, when you get down to it. But you get to Miami, it's been described as the northernmost city of South America, and it really is. You get off that plane at the airport, and you don't feel like you're in the United States anymore. And that's part of the appeal. I mean, the architecture, English is almost a second language down there. It's not Spanish is the primary language down there. So you've got the culture and the arts, and and on top of that, you've got the river. You've got the two ports. The Miami River, which I write about, has been featured in Burn Notice, Miami Vice, James Bond. I mean, it's just a really cool setting. So to answer your question, it's very unique. It's loaded with rail activity. It's just interesting.
Yeah, you talk about the movies and television shows that have used Miami as a backdrop, and it just has that, quite an appeal to an audience and in the environment there.
And if you think about Miami Vice, which was so groundbreaking, and I was looking at some old episodes, the plot really was average. There was nothing in the plot that would set it apart. It was really how Michael Mann handled the backdrop, the whole Miami scene. He was very creative in terms of how he did it. And that's the perfect example of how a backdrop can make or break an experience.
Yeah, for sure. It's, to get you something appealing about that environment, something about the vibe, the city vibe, the whole nine yards, like you said. And I think that does, as you talk about in the book, how you can kind of parlay that over to your model railroad and bring a person into that area with your design and your layout.
Yes, absolutely.
Before when we've talked about site visits, and that kind of ties in with Miami and making observations. And one thing I admire about you, and especially in your writing, is your keen sensibility to absorb an area and see beyond just the rails and in there. Because I'm a one-track mind, I guess, no pun intended, but it's like, oh, train, oh, tracks, oh, but you pick up on so much. I mean, it just amazes me the details that you notice when you do a site visit. And it's certainly things to remember for folks that go and do site visits for doing their own layouts.
And it can be very rewarding. I think I encourage people to, not just their own themes, but to the extent you can, or that you're near an area that would do it. I just think getting out and doing some rail fanning, or even if you don't see the trains, just walking the rails can really add a deeper dimension to our hobby. But getting back to the other one, I can't remember if it was an article or a course or something I took called Learning to See. And if you look at the really great artists of all time, their biographies are fascinating, but the one thing they all have in common is they don't just walk out in a field and pull out their paintbrush. I mean, some of these guys will sit down and they will study a scene all day for a week before they even start, and then they will do sketches. So there's something we can learn from them, to just sit back, slow down a little bit and take it all in, and try to get a sense for the essence of what we're looking at. Because I think where model railroaders get in trouble, and it doesn't bother them so much in the beginning when you're just getting up and running, but I call it element-driven design. And that's where ideally you want You want an overall composition. You want to look at the whole, and no individual part should drive that bus. But what happens in model railroading is the element-driven design is somebody will look at it and say, this is cool, that's cool. How do I shoehorn all of this stuff into the space? And first of all, you usually cannot. And then even if you do, it looks like a caricature. It just doesn't capture the look of the space. So just taking Miami, I mean, obviously the palms set it apart. Or Los Angeles is going to be the palms. They're a little bit different species, but you're just looking at the warehouses in any industrial park. 3/4 of them are no longer rail served. So, on your layout, you would probably want at least half of them not to have spurs, but you can have the loading doors, and just try to get a sense for what the overall scene is or what makes it what it is. You're there's something that's attracting you to this place, and you think it's the individual elements, but it's really not. It's the combination of them. And just slow down, enjoy life, and just try to take it in and get a sense for what it is about this location that appeals to you.
Yeah, and you make a great point about not every industry on a layout, or it has to be rail served, and even and they can be formally rail served. And I think that's we try to build maybe a sometimes too perfect of a world when we design a layout, like everything's as we think it should be. And maybe we do need to think about elements of, this building is out of business and they don't take cars anymore, or it's all part of the look. It's all part of, like you've talked about, that wider picture of where an area is.
And this is something I think a lot about, Ray. And I really do believe there's an element of, I don't know if it's fear is too strong of a word, but I think there's a sense that, all right, this model railroad is important to me. I'm so afraid that it's going to be boring or it's not going to have enough interest. And so you keep piling on. It's like being at a buffet and you just keep putting more in your tray. And then eventually you hit the tipping point. Whereas if you would just slow down and relax, I mean, if you talk to any model railroader, I mean, they're nowhere clear. They have nowhere close to as much built as they want to. So why design in more things you don't have time to build in the first place? So, and the same thing for operations. I mean, a lot of times guys look at operations as some stodgy, bitter pill you have to swallow. And it's really not that as far as switching goes. I mean, just slow down a little bit and try to implement some of the things they do. But rather than zipping around like a slot car, if you just slow down a little bit, it doesn't take that much to keep you occupied.
Well, I think I made that mistake on my layout, and now looking back at it, I put way too many industries on because I thought I needed all of those industries to satisfy what I wanted for operations. And now looking back at it, I didn't really need all of that. I needed a few industries, a few buildings that maybe weren't rail served, or maybe even a facility where I could do more switching, but at that one building versus, okay, drop a car here to here, and have so much complication that it doesn't feel as real as it could be if I would have actually just do what the prototype does. They don't have, 15 industries within a mile area. In most cases, it's spread out, and they have multiple cars going into an industry and spaced out. Again, just like you said, you just think operations wise, I got to have 1,000 things, but you really don't.
And the best way to learn that is, to the extent you can, is talk to actual railroaders. I mean, these guys are the most generous, nicest guys you would ever want to meet. And we're fortunate that a lot of them are in the hobby. So these are the guys that you really want to talk to and pick their brains. I mean, it's fascinating to see how it really works. I was fortunate enough to get a full tour of Trade Point Atlantic in Baltimore, which is a new short line by the general manager. I mean, it was just fascinating to listen to him talk. I just couldn't write fast enough to hear what he was explaining to me. And just implementing, if you do it from that standpoint, to me, it's more interesting, and it takes a lot less to layout to keep you entertained.
Yeah, I think that part of the observation thing too, not only those conversations, but finding time to go watch them switch an area and see what they're doing, follow what they're doing. And, sometimes that's hard in one-to-one, especially if you're in areas like New England where trees block areas and it's hard to see and get access to certain places. But just watching them function in the prototype world definitely can teach you a whole bunch of lessons, like you said. And then if you have the opportunity to talk to a real railroader and ask them questions, that's a gold mine of information.
It's really a shame because there are pockets. I mean, I live in Washington, D.C. There's really nothing in terms of freight here. It's, you've got passenger, but, for the fifth largest city in the United States, there's nothing. But 30 minutes to the north, you have Baltimore, which is just the promised land of switching, and it's all easily seen from public property. You've got 3 short lines and Norfolk Southern, CSX, so it's the kind of thing where you can just zip up there, open up your cup of coffee, and just watch them for an hour. I mean, we don't always have that luxury, but if you're on the East Coast, I mean, Baltimore is pretty easy to get to.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go to Pennsylvania, and I talked about this on the podcast with Joe Mame, and he's interested in modeling the CNF in Pennsylvania, the Norfolk Southern switching area. It was just amazing to watch him light up when he started to see how things actually work down there. And we boogied around all day. I brought the drone, we brought the cameras, and took a lot of photos, took a bunch of aerial photos of them switching and seeing what they're doing. And boy, to watch him light up. And then he couldn't get back to the, track planning software fast enough to start putting his ideas down a little bit. But yeah, those site visits are just, they can just be so inspiring to keep going or kind of just continue to develop your plan.
And there's an aspect to that. I mean, we live in an area or in a time where there's so much great information on YouTube, but out of necessity, a key point is eliminated, and that's the pause. And if you go do any rail fanning of switching, you realize these guys have to walk. They don't have wings. So
right.
A move will take place, and then the conductor has to walk and check. And in a video, that has to be edited out because who's going to watch some guy walking back and forth for 10 minutes? You're not going to do it. And
right.
My point is that nobody's going to do that on their layout. But if you're running by yourself, just slow down, enjoy your coffee, have a beer, and pause between moves as opposed to just pulling up to an industry, flipping the switch, dumping the car, and then in 10 minutes you've got everything done. So just slow down and savor the experience a little bit.
Yeah. Operations is not about the destination. It's about the journey for sure. It's about actually doing it, not completing the job. And yeah, I think that's sometimes forgotten. Like we think it's actually work or something. It's fun, right? It's what this is fun.
Yeah. I encourage people to run their layouts, as often as they can. For one thing, it makes them, it makes the equipment run better over time. The more you run it, the better it's going to be. And I don't know I think I'm probably pretty typical. Half hour, 40 minutes is enough, but I'll do it a couple times a week. So just go down there, you have a break, do a couple short moves for half hour and have your fun.
I think that's an interesting concept. And one I'll tell you, somebody was mentioning about a larger layout, and the comment was, I want to build a really big layout, but I can't imagine operating it by myself. And I'm thinking, boy, I would rethink that, at least have an area where you can go down and get some satisfaction out of a short personal operating session where it's just you, even if it's just a small switcher in an industry or something. Have that ability to go down and still be able to do it. Even if you're building a large layout that intends to have multiple operators and everything else, still building something for yourself there.
And I do know guys that are successful. I mean, I do understand the appeal of over the road and, having a transportation system where you're going from town to town. And there are guys that are successful getting, they have their crews and month in, month out, but I think they're the exception more than the norm. And I've seen other instances where guys have large layouts and they come online, and in the first couple of years, there's a lot of enthusiasm because it's new. But then over time, it seems to be harder and harder to get those 20 to 25 people together. It's just something and maybe you will. I mean, I have a couple of friends I talk to that they are successful doing that, but it's you're taking a chance.
Yeah, then you got to know where you are, and and understand if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you don't have any model railroad friends in a 20-mile radius. Building a massive layout hoping people are just going to magically appear is probably it's a pipe dream. So yeah, you got to kind of put all those thoughts in, and how long are people going to be around. And I think ultimately, going back to the books and the things and the conversations you and I had before, really know your why. Why are you doing this? Why do you want to build a layout? Who is it for? And and understanding all of those elements before you put the first screw in a board.
I think really the why for most people comes down to two things. One is the satisfaction of construction, and nobody will admit it, but a lot of guys would be totally happy doing nothing but building stuff 24/7, and they build a lot, and God bless them, they're happy. So why complain? They don't run trains that often, and if you're having a good time, it doesn't really matter, I don't think. And then the other is what Joe had experienced. Is you have a place that you find interesting or fascinating, and when you're in your layout room, you want to be transported to that location in your mind. So I think those are the two big whys.
Absolutely. So getting back to the book, and another thing that I picked up out of this Shortlines You Can Model Volume 1, Miami Swamp Rat. And by the way, I kept thinking about this, and I don't know if you know drag racing or at all. All I kept thinking was Don Garlitz. Yeah, so I was thinking Don Garlitz because he was always called, because he was from Florida, his nickname was the Swamp Rat. So I was always thinking, and he's from Ocala, which is farther north, but nonetheless, I just thought that was funny.
I did not know you had that in your DNA.
I do. I've got a drag racing, a little bit of a background here. In fact, got a nice photo that's actually sitting right here. I got a frame of Don Garlitz autographed with a picture of Big Daddy and then my dad, all in, took a picture with him. So that was Dad's hero growing up. So
I'm going to test you, see if this is true. I'm going to throw a name out.
Okay.
Grumpy Jenkins.
Yes, I know. Yep, okay, Bill Grumpy Jenkins.
Passed.
Yes.
Yep, I read. That's how twisted I was. And when I was 20, I read that book. I don't remember the name. It was like how to rebuild a small block Chevy or something.
Yeah, I've got several different interests. Drag racing's one of them, and it's I don't know. I think model railroading got kind of in the way of my drag racing, attending races and stuff. But nonetheless, yeah. But when I saw that, I said, "Oh, Swamp Rat." But anyway, that was my kind of drag racing tie-in.
People think model railroading is expensive.
Try drag racing.
So model railroading is safer and cheaper. I'll say that.
That's right. And but don't take the two. Go slow with the trains, go fast with the dragsters. And but yeah, I think every hobby is just, it's like a Mad Lib. Just take a blank and then fill in whatever hobby in the following word is expensive. Fishing's expensive, boating's expensive, drag racing, they're all expensive. So anyway, nothing's cheap that's any good and enjoyable. But one thing I felt great about the book, and this just kind of hit me as I was looking through it, and I'm looking at the photographs that you shared in there of these Miami areas. And I think one of the tendencies that we do as model railroaders, we want to build this beautiful scenery, right? Like breathtaking. People want to come see our layout and they see this just outstanding scenery. And no doubt that trains pass through this stuff. But I find more and more as I rail fan, when you get down to where they're actually working, they're not quite that pretty element that we all think that they are, right? We talked about the settings on these shows, these gritty kind of things, but that's exactly where they are. They're not the most beautiful, polished places on earth, are they?
No, they absolutely are not. That's funny that you had mentioned that Tom Komoski. And, Miami is filthy. He sent me a picture. It was a high railer. It was a dump truck on the rails, full-size dump truck with the high railer rails, and this huge vacuum. And the place was so filthy that they would have to send this thing to vacuum the trash up from the right-of-way. He sent me a picture of that. I still laugh about it. But you're right.
Wow.
And Miami's really bad. They dump stuff everywhere. And model this East Rail industrial park. I was looking at a picture. Somebody took a full-size powerboat. I'm not talking like a little skiff, a full-size cabin powerboat, and just dumped it in the parking lot. and it's sitting there rotting with this graffiti all over it. So that's I've been whiling away my time trying to find a power boat to put in the weeds.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, and whether it's Miami or, you know, I mentioned in the pre-show, I was talking about Bell Dock in New Haven, or rail yards in Willimantic, Connecticut, or anywhere else. You know, you get down in these areas, and those are the things to kind of remember and observe. So when you're putting your rail yards, you know, it's not perfectly groomed. It's not, you know, nice green lush grass. It's not any of these. It's downright dirty, gritty. And if you really want to take somebody to those areas that they work, those are things to remember as you're modeling.
And it's not really that easy to model. I mean, what you just described is much more difficult to pull off than, say, a golf course. I mean, you have a lot more layers, a lot more textures. You and I went over the scenery book, and I spent a lot of time going through that. But the best way to do it is just to take a picture of it and study it, and then try to copy it. I mean, look at where the wind blows the trash up against the side of buildings, you know, what type of trash, things like that.
Yeah. And then I think once you do that, you have something that really is in our weirdness, as you described earlier, kind of beautiful, because it looks exactly like what you would see in the real world. Right. Then that's kind of our oddness, like you said, isn't it?
I mean, you look at the graffiti. I mean, I fully get where people look on it as vandalism. But on the other hand, I mean, some of it approaches art. I mean, in Miami, you have the neighborhood of Wynwood. They actually have a graffiti park where once a year they come in and, you know, these people, you know, lay it down.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, in rust and, you know, trash and, you know, faded buildings and faded signs and just all those things to think about, you know, the you know, not so well kept fences. And there's just so many elements that you can look around and see. And as you add them and develop them into a scene, it really does a better justice for what that area is.
Absolutely.
So one of the things you start to talk about in the book is all these observations that we're talking about, and going to do a site visit like you've done, and you've taken the photographs and you've learned the stories and you've talked to rail crews and kind of got that local feeling and, you know, the story of the area, is taking all of that and then boiling it down. Why don't you talk a little bit about, you know, kind of that process and, you know, what needs to be done to start building a more realistic composition that you can model?
I think the first step is just to take a breath and relax and realize that whatever you come up with, it's going to be enough. Because as I mentioned before, the biggest trap people fall in over and over again is overreaching. And by cropping and being selective in the elements, you're still going to have more than enough to have a very satisfying hobby. And it's operationally, there's going to be enough. So the first would be just to take a leap of faith and relax that you can trim a lot of this stuff away and it's still going to be enough. And then a lot of it just comes down with practice. I mean, if a good Google would be, you know, art, learning to see. I mean, there's a lot of excellent articles and blogs written on that. But what you're trying to do is not focus so much on one individual element, but just kind of zoom back a little bit and take it in and try to get a sense for what the defining characteristics are of that scene. Just take an example. I mean, people love the steam to diesel transition era. What you're going to see is, unlike the cover of a catalog, there's only going to be three colors: white, brick, and stone. So if you can, when you build your model railroad, if you can maybe save the chartreuse and the ochre and the pinks and the reds and put those aside, and if you just, as a first step, say, learn to see what are the colors that you're looking at. Or if you go back and look at historic photos, you'll see that those really are predominant. And then, you know, you take it, you know, whether it's Connecticut or Indiana, what's an average street look like? You know, you've got your white clapboard houses, almost always will be painted white. You know, so you look at those, I think it's Rick's or Pike stuff has this Main Street USA. It's the most boring building kid ever made. I would put 5 of those in a row. You've got Walters has this new townhouse, it's a Philadelphia townhouse, line up 10 of those. So you're really looking for the ordinary and not the extraordinary. And it does take practice to sit down and say, what are the percentages that we're looking at? If you go to Miami or any city, really, 2/3 to 3/4 of the line side industries are no longer, they may be occupied, they probably have tenants, but they're not taking rail service. So you're going to have a more plausible scene if you incorporate those. So those are just a couple examples. And my approach really, it's easy to sound, it's not my way or the highway. I mean, if you enjoy the hobby and you want to have the Acela going next to the Shay and, racing each other in double track loop in your basement, nobody cares. I mean, if you're having fun, go for it and do it. But it's just a different approach. It, to me, it adds an element of depth to the hobby to think of it that way.
Yeah, I think there's different. Obviously, there's 100 doors of entry into our hobby in different ways that you can partake in it, and even up to just collecting models to watching them go around in a continuous loop to the operations that we like to enjoy. And I think for what we're talking about is the mindset of somebody who really wants to build an emulation of an area, and if you want that full emulation experience, just like I'm thinking, even like look at aircraft training, right? They go get into it, but they have all the trees and everything on a screen so that they put them in that environment. You can do the same thing with your operations with really great scenery and really bring yourself to that location through some pretty simple observations, and then some work into learning how to make this detail work on your layout.
Another thing too, and it may seem like an unusual approach, but I'll go back to what we were talking about before as far as learning from the professionals, and particularly film and television, is, we watch TV to escape and be entertained, but there's a different lens to look, at some of these shows. I mean, these guys really are, some of these cinematographers are just absolute, I mean, they're artists in their own right. So when you go, whether you're watching, Bosch or True Detective or anything of that nature, I mean, just look at the scenes that they pick and how they set them up and how they portray them. There's a lot to be learned from guys in that industry, I think.
Yeah, the theater kind of mentality, or for them it's obviously television and movies, but it's a theater kind of thing going on of what you're showing and what you're allowing the person who's viewing it to see and kind of
experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, experience that whole atmosphere. Another thing I saw in your book, and I started laughing pretty good, is your construction tips, and you're talking about bench work, and you mentioned your bench work doesn't have to be where it will support the weight of a pickup truck. And I started laughing because that's I'm an overbuilder. The one thing I do say to people is like, I've been asked, some advice about bench work, and I'm like, here's how I would build it, but it's probably overbuilt. So, take what I say with a grain of salt, and maybe you cut it in half and you don't have to buy as much lumber, but yeah, I'll start to build stuff that you can set engine blocks on top of, and it would support it.
I've got friends of mine, I say that, next time a F5 tornado comes through, I'm coming to your house. I'm going to hide under the layout because there's nothing taking.
Mine might be one of those where, it's 2x4s and, all tied together and, braced off with, plywood, and, there's a probably way overbuilt. I can tell you, like I said, it won't fall apart and whatnot, but it certainly doesn't bode well. And I think you give some really good advice about bench work in this book as well.
But I think part of it too is that there are certain areas that deserve more attention. I mean, the bench work itself just needs the support. But on the other hand, the sub roadbed is pretty important. It needs to be stable against, particularly in the area of the country that you and I live in, where you've got dry winters, humid summers, expansion and contraction. So you need a stable base. And I know I have guys that will put 1/4 inch MDF down for their sub roadbed, and just seem to, the cheapest way you can do it. And having 4x4 bench work is not going to do you any good if what the track is sitting on is not sound.
Yeah, the first humid day or something like that, they hits your layout, and next thing you know, your track work's all messed up. And boy, nothing worse when you're operating when you have bad track work or locomotives that won't pass over an area because it's just all messed up. And of course, you're working hard to do nice scenery, and now it's all messed up by crooked track. So yeah, you definitely want to spend the time and put the effort into making sure your bench work is
And a
sound.
sub road bed is something you can, once that's down, you have no opportunity to go back. I mean, if you screw that up, I mean, it's game over. So you want something that's pretty stable. I mean, I like hollow core doors. If your open grid is fine, just keep the spacing to 16 inches or less for the grid. Use high quality wood. I mean, those are just some tips.
Yeah, definitely. Careful with your lumber. Don't be like me. I went to Home Depot. I didn't really pay much attention, bought, pine to build my grid with, and now I have trouble spotting cars without them rolling out of spots because there's a bow to my bench work. And, as much as it's strong, it's bowed. Now, I think that maybe some ways it gives it a little personality. That's just me hiding behind not having to rebuild it. But nonetheless, yeah, things to think about and making sure that things are true. And you're, like you said, good sub road bed, and there's going to give you the literal foundation for good operations and get you moving forward. Nothing that'll stop a flywheel from turning more than frustration when you take shortcuts. The other cool thing I was reading in this book, and I thought about it, was structures, making sure that your background structures have some dimension to it. Why don't you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, there's some subtle, in our hobby, there's a tendency to do the same thing over and over. And, sometimes it works, and sometimes we have a tendency to stick with things that are visually jarring. And you have to be very careful about what you put tight against the backdrop. And here's why. If you have a flat, if you look at a shed in your backyard, if you move to the left, you're going to see more of one wall. If you move to the right, you're going to see more of another, and vice versa. If you have an 1/8-inch flat against the backdrop, there is nothing in the distance other than that wall. And we're used to seeing buildings, and your eye subconsciously is going, what's going on here, that there's no depth. So you have to be very careful with what you put tight against the backdrop. So the first is to keep, to the extent you can, keep them short, 1 story or less. And then try to, if you have flats, and then hide the edges so you can't see what's missing back there. But the more depth you can add to the structure, the less visually jarring it's going to be. The taller the structure, the thicker you want it to be. But I would say for your typical 1-story building, I generally shoot for 4 to 5 inches if I can.
Now, would you do this for all buildings, or are we talking about buildings that the railroad interacts with?
All of them.
You would say all buildings do that same thing,
because it's just a visual issue. It has nothing to do with operation. So anything, you want to have some depth. Any building that's up against the backdrop, try to get 3 to 4 inches of depth if you can.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I mean, I've seen some buildings that are done real shallow, and it's like you said, if you're looking at it dead straight on, it may be okay, but once you start getting on that angle and you look at it, it just doesn't sell versus having something that has some dimension. And I'm certainly a fan of, any building that I even operate with. I want to be able, if it's especially physically interacting with it, I don't want it to be flat. You want it to have some dimension pop to make it feel like it's an entire scene that you're switching at.
Now, there is one exception where you can get away with this. The problem is with the edges. And I noticed this, there's a guy, Cliff Powers, had the Magnolia route. If, for example, you were to wallpaper the entire wall with structures, edge to edge, I don't know if you remember John Wright's Federal Street, where you're not seeing the edges of the structures. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but if you have a whole bank of buildings, you can get away with them being thin because the eye is not seeing that there's nothing behind it. So that is a way out. With John Wright, that was one of my favorite layouts with his Federal Street, Pittsburgh layout. Cliff Powers did that with an earlier layout. You'll see that he had that whole bank, and in those situations, it works. But where you get in trouble is if you have an 1/8 inch thick 4-story warehouse going up against the backdrop, that can get tricky.
So you mentioned that you have another book coming. Why don't you mind giving us a preview of what we can expect in the next couple of weeks?
This was the book that almost killed me. I mean, it's
is that the title? Is that the title? The book that almost killed me?
I should have put that on there. It was. I'm very happy with it's How to Build Structures that I wrote for Kalmbach. If you go on Amazon, you can pre-order it. Those books are really difficult to write, Ray. They're very time-consuming because, unlike the Swamp Rat, where you can just sit down and let your imagination and just type away, with how-to construction books, if anybody's done an article can relate to this, you have to build it, then you stop, you take a photograph, you edit the photograph, then you move on to the next step, rinse and repeat. So it's very, very time-consuming. And a lot in the structures book, I didn't have the structures ahead of time. I mean, I needed to show the process of them coming together. So every structure in that book was, starting from zero and building it step by step. But I always like working with Jeff Wilson. He's my first editor from back in the day. So I'm happy with how it turned out. I think it'll be helpful for a lot of people, but it's not easy to write.
Well, that's excellent. We'll always look forward to new books from you and learning from your experiences, building layouts for others and building for yourself. And speaking of that, amongst all this writing, have you been able to make any more progress on the East Rail 2 and in any other changes to the downtown spur?
The East Rail was, it is now done. I just did an article for Otto Vondrak and I uploaded it to him yesterday.
Awesome.
The thing, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And the one thing I've noticed, and I think it's a thing I like about model railroading, is at any point in the process, you can say, okay, I'm going to level out and just stay where I am. But if you want to continue to improve, I mean, not to show off, but just for your own personal satisfaction, you can continue to improve your skills. Well, I've got well into life. I mean, I've got friends that are in their 80s, and I'm looking at them like, geez, they're better than when they were 75. And so with East Rail, it was really an effort to see if I could bump my skills up. There were some areas that I thought I was weak in as far as ground cover and trees and gravel lots. And so when I did the scenery book, a lot of that was just to push myself to, bump my skills up. But there was an East Rail 1. I really enjoyed it. I think this is has some nuances that make me enjoy it more. So if you look my name up on Flickr, I've got all the pictures up there if you want to look at them, and I've got my blog. So
yeah, we'll include all those links, including links to Lance's books, all on our website, aroundthelayout.com/episodes/101 will be the page that all that information can be found. We'll share some photos on there as well. So if you want to pre-order that book, we'll have that there. If you want to order the new book, Shortlines You Can Model Volume 1, or any other Lance Mindheim book. And I can tell you that I got the book Scenery for Modern Switching Layouts, and boy, there's just a gold mine of information in there and new techniques I've tried. I mean, I certainly haven't mastered them, but I'm certainly continuing to try them, and, painting track a different way and the methods that you talk about for hiding, for less detailed track like Atlas track. And then obviously I've actually dove into getting some micro engineering track and checking that out as well, and hope to work it into a few dioramas that I want to build for some of our appearances with the podcast, where I can display rail cars and et cetera at our shows. So looking forward to playing around with that. But again, if you want to get any of those books, definitely click on the link and we'll be able to provide all of that for you. So Lance, I want to thank you for coming on Around the Layout and sharing your experience with writing a book. We'll definitely be looking forward to Shortlines You Can Model Volume 2 with no guaranteed release date, but I'm sure now that you've committed yourself, I'm sure we'll be seeing some more writing out of you, and we certainly look forward to that.
Well, thanks for having me on, Ray. I always enjoy it. I really do.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.